You'll need to remove that entire system by Friday, or we'll start fining you daily, Colleen Durrett said, smug and unbothered, standing in my driveway like she owned the property she'd just violated. She hadn't even looked at Tessa, my niece, still curled in a blanket on the porch, trembling under the weight of what just happened. Her clipboard didn't shake, her mouth didn't apologize, and she sure as hell didn't expect the censor system, titled in her own violation report, to capture her crawling through my bathroom window. I didn't blink. "That motion sensor you're threatening me over," I said quietly. "It recorded you halfway through my bathroom wall. I wrote the firmware." She froze. Her eyes darted to the patrol car still idling at the curb. But it was too late. HOA Karen crawled through my bathroom. That was already the title saved in the footage archive. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I stepped off the porch and closer to the shadows thrown by the cruiser's flashing lights. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. Colleen hadn't done her homework. "My name is Luke Hartwell," I told her. "Aerospace security systems engineer. I don't install doorbells. I write systems that identify low-orbit breaches and redirect satellites around them. And the system you triggered, that was built to protect someone a hell of a lot more important than a homeowner association's peace of mind." Tessa looked up from the porch steps, eyes still wide from the scream she couldn't take back. 3 years ago, I promised my sister, while she lay in hospice, that I'd protect her daughter with everything I had. I moved here, bought this house, gave up contracts that paid 5 times what I make now. The only thing I asked for was to be left alone. And now, the woman who fined me for improper mailbox sheen had the audacity to wedge herself through the window I reinforced just to keep that girl safe. Tessa had only gone to wash her face. That's all it took. The soft chime from the motion sensor was followed by a scream. I was down the hallway in seconds, and Colleen's shoe was still lodged in the split-glass hinge when I yanked it back open. She'd called it an inspection, claimed she thought it was unlocked and wanted to confirm structural compliance. The police wrote it up as a suspicious entry. She left without cuffs, only warnings and glares, but now she was here again, clinging to the HOA rulebook like it would erase the footage synced to my private server. I didn't threaten her. I didn't have to. She handed me the citation for unapproved modifications and waited for me to fold. I didn't. I took it with 2 fingers, walked it over to the trash bin, and dropped it inside. "You're overstepping, Luke," she said, voice low now. "No, Colleen," I said. "You crawled into my bathroom. You passed the line weeks ago." People were watching now, from driveways, porches, car windows. One neighbor held up a phone. Another leaned in to whisper to his wife. This wasn't going away quietly, and she knew it. Tessa clutched the blanket tighter. I saw the way her shoulders curled inward, just like her mom used to when she tried to hide bad news. This wasn't about compliance. This was about protection, about trauma, about a girl trying to feel safe again in a world that had already taken too much from her. That window, that sensor, that's the line between what we've already lost and what I'll never let anyone take again. Where are you watching from? Because the HOA just tried to bury a violation inside a rulebook, but they picked the wrong engineer, the wrong guardian, the wrong promise. And I'm just getting started. Colleen didn't show her face the next morning. Not on her daily walk, not on her usual HOA surveillance loop, not even peeking out from her front window. But her absence didn't slow the machine. By noon, I had 3 more citations posted to my door. One for unapproved glass tint on upper windows, another for improper storage of surveillance hardware visible from the street, and a third accusing me of emitting unauthorized radio frequencies. That last one almost made me laugh. Almost. The language was technical enough to scare the average resident into compliance, but vague enough to avoid legal traction. I knew that trick. It's how bureaucracies work when they're backed into a corner. Paper over the problem and hope the target folds. I didn't fold. Instead, I spent the morning walking the block, not knocking on doors, just walking, just observing. Across the street, Cheryl Rourke had 5 solar panels on her roof, angled just like mine. No citation on her door. 3 houses down, Daniel Cobb's security cameras were mounted just as high as mine, painted matte black to match the trim. No citation. Behind the cul-de-sac, Kendra's electric vehicle charger ran all night, blinking blue through her side gate. Untouched, unbothered, unpunished. So why me? Simple. Colleen needed a target, and she picked the man who didn't smile at her town hall meetings, didn't wave when she passed by, and didn't submit his security plans for pre-approval. I submitted them to the city, not to her. By early evening, the neighborhood had started to shift. Not all at once, not obviously, but I noticed. Neighbors who used to nod politely now lingered longer on their porches when I passed. A few made excuses to water their front hedges or check their mailboxes when they saw me in the driveway. One even crossed the street, pretending to look at a crack in the sidewalk, but not before glancing at my roof twice. Whispers travel faster than complaints in a neighborhood like this. I knew what they were asking. Why would the HOA president be crawling through his window? I didn't answer the question. Not yet. Let the story grow, legs first. By sunset, I sat with Tessa on the back patio, watching the solar lanterns flicker to life one by one. She hadn't said much all day. Not after the scream, not after the police left, not even after I made her favorite lunch and pretended like everything was fine. She finally broke the silence. She was looking for something, wasn't she? I turned toward her. Yeah. Not a violation? Number? Not that. She nodded, lips pressed tight, her shoulders still tense, the blanket from the night before now folded on her lap. She doesn't think you'll fight back, Tessa whispered. She's wrong. That night, I reviewed the bylaw PDFs, not the summary packets, the actual structure, the original incorporation documents, the archive voting records from the community's transition to full HOA governance. I wasn't looking for loopholes. I was looking for inconsistencies. Systems have patterns. And Colleen was sloppy. By 1 a.m., I had a growing folder of discrepancies, dates that didn't match, fines that were issued before amendments passed, logs of board members voting on regulations that hadn't been formally ratified. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd worked enough regulatory audits in aerospace to know when paperwork didn't align with protocol. Still, that wasn't my weapon. My weapon was understanding systems, inputs, triggers, fail-safes. And the HOA wasn't just a bureaucracy. It was a system with weaknesses. Colleen liked being in control, but she didn't know how to lock down every variable. She had no idea who she'd picked a fight with. The next morning, I watched a white SUV pull into the HOA lot next to the community center. I recognized the plates: Mark Denby, secretary, longtime friend of Colleen's, quiet, always voting along party lines, but always the one to hesitate before signing. I watched him linger in the car for a full 30 seconds before getting out. Interesting. There's a crack in every machine, and I'd just spotted mine. Mark Denby was already inside the HOA office when I arrived the next day. He sat behind the reception desk, tapping a pen on a manila folder while pretending to scroll his phone. The front blinds were drawn, but I could still see the dust trails in the slats where someone had pulled them open earlier and peeked out. I stepped through the glass door without knocking. He flinched just slightly, shoulders stiffening, hand freezing mid-tap. "Luke," he said, standing like he'd rehearsed it. "You hear about the citations?" "No," I replied. "I'm here about Colleen." He didn't sit back down, just hovered by the edge of the desk, like distance might absolve him. The room was quiet except for the ticking wall clock and the muffled hum of the HVAC. Everything else, the printer, the corner ficus, the bulletin board plastered with rules, felt frozen in a kind of moral stillness. Mark cleared his throat. "If this is about what happened 2 nights ago, it is." He didn't meet my eyes. I waited. Let the silence settle. People like Mark don't react to confrontation. They react to pressure slowly building in the room, like a sealed valve about to crack. "She said you'd overreact," he muttered finally, shifting his weight. "Did she also say what she was doing, half inside my bathroom?" He winced. "She said she was inspecting. Unannounced, no warrant, through a closed window? Look, I didn't vote on that. She didn't even mention—" I stepped closer, just enough for him to feel the weight of what I wasn't saying. "I know she used her access credentials. The log shows a board override synced to my security relay. You're the secretary. You sign off on those logs. His jaw worked, like he wanted to speak but didn't trust the words. I can subpoena the records if you want this to get formal, I said, voice low. Or you can help me understand why the president of this HOA used her badge privileges to commit a break-in. Mark glanced at the door behind him, the one that led to the inner office. His eyes didn't land there long, but I caught it. Reflexes tell stories. She's been under pressure, he said finally. People are filing complaints, backing out of initiatives, threatening to run for positions. She said we needed to stay ahead of infractions or lose control. So she broke into my house. He looked up, finally locking eyes. No one expected her to go that far, he said. I didn't know, I swear. But he had known something. The tension in his hands, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the desk now. Mark wasn't evil. He was complicit. There's a difference. Complicit people live in the cracks between comfort and conscience. But enough pressure, and they shift. I didn't know Tessa was home, he added, quieter. You think it matters less if she wasn't? His silence said everything. I softened just slightly. You have a daughter, right? He nodded. Imagine someone crawled through her window. Imagine it was your friend doing it. Mark looked down. His pen dropped to the floor with a dull clack. When he bent to pick it up, I saw his hands shaking. She's not who she used to be, he murmured. Colleen. When she first took over, she just wanted things clean and safe. But lately, it's like she doesn't care about the rules, only the control. He straightened. You didn't hear this from me, but she's been pushing for a rule expansion, wants to require full access to resident surveillance data, says it's for community safety. My stomach turned, and she thinks I'm the threat. You have the strongest system on the block. She wants it neutralized. There it was, the pressure point. I stepped back. You need to decide, Mark, what side of this you want to land on. He didn't answer, just stared at the manila folder like it held the moral compass he lost 6 months ago. But I saw it, the hesitation, the buried guilt. It wasn't enough yet, but it was close enough to matter. The next morning, a certified envelope sat on my doorstep like a snake waiting to strike. HOA letterhead, Colleen's signature in heavy ink. I didn't bother opening it inside. I already knew the game. Tessa watched me from the kitchen as I sliced the seal with a butter knife. Her hair was still damp from the shower, her movements slower than usual. She hadn't asked about the HOA, but I saw the tension settle behind her eyes like smoke curling into corners. I unfolded the paper and scanned the contents. They were moving to formally sanction me. Effective immediately, I had 72 hours to deactivate all unapproved surveillance systems, remove unauthorized electrical installations, and comply with a follow-up inspection scheduled for Friday morning. Failure would trigger compounding fines, HOA legal arbitration, and escalated enforcement measures. That last phrase wasn't regulation. It was a threat. I folded the letter neatly and set it on the counter beside my coffee. Then I pulled up my laptop and opened the security control panel. The system logs from the past week flickered across the screen, badge pings, sensor trips, zone activations, and there, time-stamped at 2:08 a.m., 2 nights ago, an override ping originating from an administrative access badge. Badge number 004, Colleen's. But something else caught my eye. A brief connection request to a device I didn't recognize, an attempted relay sync to a panel ID that didn't belong to me. I dug deeper. The log showed a second administrator-level signal routed from a neighborhood access point on the far end of the block. It had attempted to shadow my sensor before Colleen physically approached the house. Someone had preemptively tried to suppress the alarm. I leaned back in my chair. That wasn't incompetence. That was coordination. Tessa stepped into the room quietly, her gaze sliding toward the envelope. They're not stopping, are they? No, I said, but neither am I. The rest of the day passed like fog over glass, quiet, tense. Every knock at the door made Tessa flinch. She spent most of her time in the living room, curled up with her tablet, one earbud in and one out, listening, watching. By late afternoon, I stepped out to the side of the house to check the breaker system and saw Colleen 2 doors down, standing in Cheryl Rourke's yard, clipboard in hand, voice low and persuasive. Cheryl's husband hovered near the garage, arms folded tight across his chest. Colleen's eyes flicked toward me. She smiled, waved. I didn't wave back. Inside, I updated the system with a temporary patch, redirecting override pings through a virtual sandbox so future attempts could be logged without impacting performance. I labeled it Protocol Lockjaw, something I'd built years ago for a classified contract involving drone interception. Overkill for a suburban HOA? Maybe. But after seeing Colleen's calm walk through Cheryl's yard, I no longer believed she was acting alone. That night, Janice Liao rang the doorbell. She stood under the porch light with a cautious expression and a folder clutched to her chest. I hadn't seen her in weeks. She usually kept to herself, working odd hours in cybersecurity for a logistics firm. "I heard what happened," she said, "and I think it's time you saw something." I stepped aside. She set the folder on my kitchen table. Inside were printouts of her system logs, marked with highlighter, annotated in her neat handwriting. Her cameras had caught movement near her side gate at 2:04 a.m., just minutes before my system was tripped. The same shadow, the same hoodie, same building. Her logs also showed a spike in wireless interference, just enough to degrade camera resolution for 6 seconds. "I didn't want to believe it," she said, "but it wasn't a coincidence, and I think they tried the same thing on me a week earlier, but I wrote it off as a bug." I flipped through the pages slowly. Janice had the same pattern, the same intrusion trail. They were probing all the homes with security stronger than the HOA's baseline system. "They're mapping us," I said. She nodded. "And when Colleen doesn't like what she sees, she finds a way in." Now I had 2 data points, 2 victims, a pattern. But I still needed proof of intent. Colleen hadn't just broken a rule, she'd exploited a system designed to protect the people under her authority. That wasn't oversight. That was infiltration. I spent the next morning reconstructing the digital footprint. The administrator override attempt that hit my system just before Colleen's crawl-through wasn't an isolated glitch. It was a masked credential ping, a digital knock pretending to be a friendly hand. I isolated the handshake protocol in the logs and ran a trace on the embedded MAC address. It didn't point to Colleen's device. It pointed to the boardroom router in the HOA office. I stared at the screen for a long time, the glow reflecting off the rim of my coffee mug. That router shouldn't have administrative privileges over any private residence. The HOA had access only to shared community surveillance, per city regulation. Anything more was a violation of California residential data privacy laws, and they'd used it to reach into my house. I exported the logs, compiled them into a mirrored readout, and burned 2 copies to an encrypted thumb drive, one for my safe, one for the city inspector's inbox. But this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. Colleen was using HOA infrastructure to run unapproved security tests on private homes. She wasn't just overreaching. She was operating outside her authority entirely. That's when I remembered the moment in the HOA office. Mark's glance toward the inner door, the one with the key code lock. That was where they stored the core access logs for badge privileges and override credentials. Mark hadn't said a word, but his eyes had. I pushed back from my desk and stood. It was time to return the favor. At the HOA office, the lobby was empty again. No receptionist. Just the soft hum of recycled air and the faint scent of old coffee. I waited 10 minutes before the inner door opened and Mark stepped out, holding a folder under one arm and a phone to his ear. He froze when he saw me. "I'm just leaving," he said quickly, lowering the phone. "Not yet, you're not." He hesitated, hand on the door frame. "I know the override came from here," I said. "From this building. The router ID matches your central control panel." He didn't speak, but I saw the panic spark behind his eyes. "You don't have to say anything," I continued. "Just nod if I'm right." Nothing, then, barely, a tilt of the chin, a fraction of a nod. "Why?" Mark glanced behind him, then pulled the door closed and stepped into the lobby with me. His hands trembled slightly. "She told us we needed to calibrate compliance," he said under his breath. "Said the board had a responsibility to preempt security vulnerabilities. We didn't know what that meant until the test run started. She said it was non-invasive, that no one would notice. Test runs, I repeated. She had access keys, said the bylaw revisions gave her expanded authority. But no one ever voted. She just implemented. He looked tired now, older than he had last week. I realized I wasn't talking to the secretary anymore. I was talking to a man trying to find a way back to his conscience. Did you authorize her override into my system? No, he said. I saw the ping afterward. She used my credentials. I didn't know until the system flagged an anomaly. I was going to delete the log, but I didn't. You still have it? He nodded. Locked to my admin partition. But if I open that for you, I lose everything. Not if we make it public. He looked up, startled. If the city sees this first, before Colleen can bury it, then you're not the fall guy. You're the whistleblower. Mark breathed out slowly. I never thought it would come to this. It already has, I said. You saw what she did to my house, to my niece. He nodded again, this time firmer. Give me until tomorrow, he said. Let me pull it clean. You'll bring it to me directly? No, he said. I'll bring it to someone who can act on it. I tilted my head. Who? He looked down at the folder in his hand. Inspector Ortiz. My pulse steadied. That was the name listed on the original Housing Code revision documents. A city inspector. Colleen had been climbing higher than I thought, and now the ladder was about to break. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid of what Colleen might do, but because I knew how someone like her operated when she sensed something slipping. Cornered people didn't retreat. They clawed. I'd seen it in defense contracts, seen it in high-stakes audits where someone buried too many lies too deep and ran out of places to shovel. Tessa woke up around 4. I heard her in the hallway, moving slow, like her feet weren't sure about the floorboards. I met her at the kitchen table with 2 mugs, one with cocoa, one with coffee. She sat without a word, the steam curling between us like some unspoken pact. Is it going to get worse? She finally asked. Before it gets better? Yeah, she nodded. I can handle it. I believed her, but she shouldn't have to. By mid-morning, the neighborhood buzz was unmistakable. Not loud, not obvious. But I felt it in the way people watched from windows and paused conversations when I passed. Mark had talked. Somewhere between the silence and the sideways glances, the truth had started leaking, which meant Colleen would be moving fast now. Sure enough, by 11 a.m., an emergency HOA email hit every inbox in the community. Subject line, Security Overhaul Initiative, Immediate Compliance Required. It was a new regulation proposal, one that hadn't gone through the usual approval channels. It demanded all private surveillance systems operating above city-defined thresholds be registered with the HOA for compliance review, including admin-level access for community coordination. They'd worded it like safety, but it read like a hostile takeover. And the deadline? 48 hours. I printed the email, annotated every legal inconsistency I could find, cross-referenced the city's housing tech guidelines. That's when I saw it. Colleen had copied language directly from a draft policy the city had rejected months ago for privacy violations. She wasn't just reckless. She was bold enough to recycle bad legislation and hope no one noticed. That was her mistake. While I compiled the comparison document, my doorbell rang. Janice. She looked tired, face drawn beneath her glasses. They just inspected my backyard, she said. Didn't knock, didn't ask, said they were acting under emergency authority. I blinked. Did you record it? She nodded. Both body cams on. They said I was flagged for non-compliance and mentioned your name twice. That settled it. I wasn't the only target. I was the excuse. I handed her the printed packet. This is proof the new directive violates city policy. I'm sending it to Inspector Ortiz. Good, she said, because they're losing control. We sat at my kitchen table and uploaded both our evidence files to a joint server. Mark had sent me a one-line message earlier that morning. Package will be delivered 1600 hours. He didn't specify where, but I knew what it meant. He'd pulled the log, the digital bullet. Now it was time to aim. By mid-afternoon, I got the call. Blocked number, calm voice. Mr. Hartwell, this is Inspector Rami Ortiz. I've received your documentation, as well as a third-party submission containing internal HOA activity logs. I need to speak with you in person. I gave him the address. We scheduled for the following morning. As I hung up, I noticed Tessa on the stairs, listening. Is that the guy? She asked. The one who can stop her? I nodded. He can help. Her shoulders eased just slightly. What if it doesn't work? She said. I thought about that. About all the times I'd tried to do the right thing and watch bureaucracies chew it up and spit it out. Then I looked at the wall, at the sensor embedded in the molding, the one that tripped when Colleen tried to crawl through, the one that still had her shoe scuff on the frame. It will, I said, because this time we're not just defending ourselves. We're the warning shot. Outside, a soft wind rattled the dry leaves along the curb. Somewhere in the distance, the metal thud of a mailbox closing echoed down the block. The neighborhood was quiet, but not for long. Mark arrived just after 4, exactly as promised. He didn't knock. He stood on the porch for 3 full minutes, eyes scanning the street like he expected someone to jump out of the hedges with a camera. When I opened the door, he didn't say anything, just handed me a plain manila envelope, sealed and folded at the corners from the pressure of his grip. She doesn't know I have it, he said, but she'll figure it out soon. I stepped aside to let him in, and he hesitated, not out of fear, out of shame. Inside, I offered him water, but he shook his head. She was going to override the rest of the block next, he said, voice low. Started pushing for full administrative uplinks on all units with third-party systems. Anyone with a stronger firewall than the HOA base level, she marked as a surveillance inconsistency. And you logged it? I asked. He nodded. I started a shadow archive the day she used my badge. Something in my gut told me she wasn't going to stop. I broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a flash drive and 2 printed reports. One showed a full administrator override schedule, timestamps, device IDs, and a series of commands marked silent ping. The other was a breakdown of the credentials used to deploy those signals. Colleen had used her own once, Mark's twice, and someone else's. A third admin ID I didn't recognize. There's a third access point? Mark nodded grimly. Treasurer, Daniel Cobb. She brought him in 2 months ago. Said she needed someone less sentimental on the board. He's been feeding her private access codes from resident registry forms. Ones we're not even supposed to store. That wasn't negligence. That was intent. Coordinated, systemized intent. Did you give all this to Inspector Ortiz already? I asked. Mark shook his head. I gave him a legal summary and the override badge logs, not the deep file. I wanted to hand that off personally, to you. I studied him. Why? Because you didn't ask for this fight, and you didn't try to drag me into it either. You waited, gave me space to figure out where I stood. He sat down slowly at the kitchen table. For the first time, he looked like a man unburdened, not lighter, but clearer. Tessa okay? He asked, glancing toward the hallway. She's strong, I said. I have a daughter, he murmured. Same age, that night, when I saw the log, I kept picturing her in that bathroom. Silence fell between us like a dropped pane of glass. I broke it first. She's lucky to have you now. Mark looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed but steady. What are you going to do with this? Use it, I said, legally, precisely, and publicly. He smiled faintly. Then she's already lost. He left quietly, no handshake, just a silent nod at the door. I watched him cross the street, get into his car, and drive off without once looking back. With the flash drive now in my hand, the strategy became real. This wasn't just a matter of holding ground anymore. This was about making sure no one else ever had to defend their privacy with a police report. No more hidden pings, no more window entries, no more HOA-controlled systems masquerading as community security. Back at my desk, I loaded the contents of the drive and backed it up onto my encrypted cloud. Every override packet, every boardroom credential misuse, every silent intrusion log. It was all there, neatly time-stamped, easily traceable. I looped in Janice, sent her a copy for legal redundancy, and flagged the key files for Inspector Ortiz to review in the morning. Then I prepared the presentation. Nothing dramatic, no theatrics, just facts, system flowcharts, and one final slide with the motion capture still. Colleen Durrett's foot halfway through my bathroom window, mid-entry, timestamp blazing in red. Tessa walked in as I saved the file. "Is that her?" I nodded. "That's the moment this all started." She looked at it a while, then whispered, "It's not going to happen again, is it?" "No," I said. "It's going to end." She leaned her head on my arm, silent. I didn't move. The battle was no longer about rules. It was about accountability. And tomorrow, that battle would become public. By sunrise, the presentation was done. I'd stitched it together with the same precision I used designing orbital telemetry recon for high-altitude drones. Simple, sharp, and undeniable. No dramatic music, no speculative theory. Just a clean chain of command misuse, digital fingerprints, and one public servant caught halfway through a window she had no legal right to touch. At 9 a.m., sharp, I drove downtown and submitted everything, physically and digitally, to Inspector Rami Ortiz's office. No email thread, no risk of deletion. I signed the intake form myself and left with a time-stamped receipt. Then I went quiet, because this wasn't the part where I stood in front of a podium and declared war. This was the part where I watched the enemy panic before the first shot even landed. Back home, I kept my phone face down and focused on outfitting the second layer. I reconfigured the backup network, created a secondary VLAN split off from the core relay, and loaded a lockdown script into the exterior sensor grid. If Colleen or Daniel tried one more override, the system would log it, bounce it, and forward it to 3 media inboxes pre-written with the subject line, "Illegal surveillance attempts by HOA board, proof enclosed." I called it Protocol Thermocline, because the moment they tried to breach again, they'd hit an invisible barrier and drown in the heat beneath it. Tessa peeked into the office around noon, hair still damp from her shower. "Did you finish it?" she asked. "It's done," I said. "And in safe hands now." She nodded, didn't ask more. That was how we were operating lately. Quiet affirmations in place of long explanations. By mid-afternoon, Janice stopped by. She didn't come inside, just handed me a manila envelope and whispered, "She's calling an emergency board session. 7 p.m., community hall." What's her angle? She's trying to flip the narrative, make it about resident safety and overzealous private installations. But people are asking questions. After what happened to you, after what happened to me. She stepped back, lips tight. They're not buying it this time. I opened the envelope. Inside was a roster of attendees, including HOA board members, Colleen, Daniel Cobb, and one new name, legal consultant Jeremy Nance. "She's lawyering up," I said. Janice folded her arms. "She thinks she can out-talk the evidence. Then she doesn't understand what she's walking into." I spent the next few hours rehearsing the presentation, not for performance, but for structure. I needed to predict her deflections, anticipate her denials. Each slide was a pin. Her own words, rules, and timestamps would be the board that held her down. At 6:30 p.m., I loaded everything onto a secure tablet, copied the slides onto a flash backup, and slipped both into a padded case. Tessa watched me from the stairs. "You sure this is the way?" "It's the only way," I said. "And it's time." The walk to the community hall felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the weight of what I carried. Maybe it was the silence on every porch I passed, as neighbors turned away from their lawn work or TV glow to watch me go by. I wasn't just walking into a meeting. I was walking into a reckoning. Outside the hall, people gathered in small knots. Husbands, wives, older residents with folded arms, younger ones with crossed stares. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. They waited. Mark was already at the door. "You ready?" he asked, voice low. "I've been ready since she crawled through that window." He gave me a half smile. "Then let's make this official." The community hall wasn't large, but tonight it held more than just people. It held silence, the kind that presses in around the edges of truth when the lies start cracking. Colleen stood near the front table, clipboard tucked under her arm, smile tight and rehearsed. Daniel Cobb stood beside her, jaw clenched. His eyes met mine and flinched just slightly. I walked to the front row, tablet case in hand, and took my seat without a word. This wasn't my opening move. That had already happened. This was the moment the lights came on. The room settled just past 7. Folding chairs scraped back, neighbors murmured, and the hum of the overhead fluorescence buzzed like static over a live wire. I sat still in the front row, the tablet balanced in my lap like a silent threat. Colleen opened with practiced warmth. Her tone dipped in community concern. She thanked everyone for attending on short notice and claimed the emergency meeting was called to address growing confusion over surveillance standards. She was good, measured, almost maternal, eyes drifting toward families with that soft edge she used during bake sales and park renovations. But her voice tightened when she reached the real point. Unfortunately, she said, a few residents have taken their personal systems beyond reasonable compliance. These installations not only pose a privacy risk to their neighbors, but also violate several articles in the updated HOA guidelines. The projector behind her lit up. A bullet point list appeared. Vague phrases like data overreach, visual perimeter invasion, and non-uniform technological presence. No one asked questions. Not yet. I could see the strategy. Frame us as paranoid. Frame herself as the gatekeeper of balance. She thought if she moved first, she could own the narrative. But she didn't know what Mark and I had lined up behind her. She finished her opening and turned to the table. Now, before we open the floor, our legal consultant Jeremy Nance will briefly review how compliance measures align with city ordinances. Jeremy stood, tan suit, soft tie, slick delivery. He cited vague sections of city housing code without referencing case law, sprinkled in terms like harmonization and proportional integration. It sounded official, almost convincing, until a voice from the back interrupted. Can you cite the exact ordinance for residential override permissions? The room turned. Inspector Ortiz stood by the door, badge clipped to his belt, calm and unreadable. His presence hadn't been announced. His name hadn't been called. Colleen blinked. Inspector, I wasn't aware I wasn't on the agenda, he said, but I was invited by a concerned resident and provided extensive documentation this morning. Jeremy stammered. We're still in preliminary review. None of this. I've seen enough, Ortiz said, but I'll let Mr. Hartwell speak before I do. Colleen's eyes found me, the edges tight now. I stood and stepped up beside the screen. I didn't look at her. I looked at the people, the ones who'd been watching their mailboxes grow crowded with violations, the ones who whispered behind hedges and wondered who would be next. Good evening, I said. You know me. I'm the guy who moved in 3 years ago with the niece he inherited and the cameras you were told to fear. I tapped the tablet. The projector blinked and my first slide came up. A timestamp. A frame from my motion capture feed. Colleen's foot halfway through my bathroom window. Gasps rippled across the room. Slide 2. The access log. Administrative override pinged at 2:08 a.m. from inside the HOA office. Slide 3. Mark's credential profile, showing badge misuse. Slide 4. Janice's footage. A shadow in her yard. Another override attempt traced back to a router she never approved access to. I'm not going to lecture you, I said. I'm just going to show you what's been happening while you were told we were the threat. Slide 5. The illegal surveillance directive. The recycled city proposal Colleen tried to pass off as HOA policy. Slide 6. A redacted email from Daniel Cobb requesting expanded resident access privileges, without vote, without discussion. Slide 7. The chain of overrides, names, timestamps, routes. The anatomy of a digital break-in. I turned back toward the room. Whatever you think about technology, this isn't about gadgets or systems. It's about power, about who gets to decide what's safe and what gets hidden under the word compliance. The room was silent. No more chair shuffles, no coughs, no whispers. Ortiz stepped forward. I've reviewed the material. I'll be initiating a formal investigation into privacy violations and misuse of administrative authority. This office will be recommending an immediate freeze on all HOA enforcement actions until a hearing is scheduled. Colleen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Daniel Cobb lowered his head. And behind me, I heard the first few claps. Quiet at first, then growing. Not victory, not yet. But momentum. The applause didn't last long. just enough for people to feel the room had turned, just long enough for Colleen to realize her grip on the narrative was slipping through her fingers like loose gravel on a slope. She leaned toward the mic again, trying to reassert control. Let's not confuse a technical presentation with a legal verdict. This board hasn't seen the full context. Ortiz raised a hand. The context is under review, Mrs. Durrett, but based on what I've seen so far, your access to resident systems violated city guidelines and possibly state statutes. Until the investigation concludes, you'll refrain from issuing enforcement actions or modifying HOA records. The words struck harder than any raised voice could have. Daniel Cobb stood slowly from his chair, muttered something to Jeremy, the attorney, and left through the side exit without a word. Jeremy followed a few minutes later, face pale and folder forgotten on the table. And Colleen, she sat there, rigid, like a statue trying to remember how to breathe. Mark was still near the back. When my eyes met his, he gave a subtle nod, the kind you give a teammate after the shot lands clean. I packed up the tablet while Colleen sat frozen in her chair. The hall stayed quiet. No one rushed to defend her. No board members rose to challenge Ortiz. No resident stood to question the evidence. The silence was its own kind of verdict. Outside, the night air was cool and dry, a soft wind running across the sidewalk like it was clearing away the static left behind. I didn't speak until we reached the end of the block and rounded toward home. Janice caught up to me halfway there. "She's not stepping down yet," she said, breath tight. "But she's bleeding. She knows it." "She'll hold on as long as she can," I said. "Control is all she's got left." Janice's expression hardened. "Then we take the rest." The following morning, I filed a formal petition for board re-election. According to the bylaws, if 1/3 of the residents signed within 5 business days, a recall vote could be triggered at the next public meeting. I knew the numbers, I knew the rules, and this time, I had the neighborhood's attention. Within hours, flyers were up. Not just from me, from Cheryl Rourke, from Janice, from residents I barely knew, but who were suddenly fiercely ready to sign. Every violation they had swallowed, every arbitrary citation, every ounce of quiet resentment was suddenly lit like a dry field in summer. Tessa helped me organize the physical packets. She didn't ask if we'd win. She just asked what would happen if we did. "We reset," I told her. "We clear out the rot, start over." That night, I checked my external relay one more time. No pings, no override attempts, no unauthorized connections. Colleen had gone dark, but silence wasn't safety. Not yet. 2 days later, an unmarked car idled at the edge of the block. I noticed it while taking out the trash. Plain black sedan, city plates, tinted windows. Rami Ortiz stepped out a moment later, walked up my drive, and handed me a sealed envelope. "Interim findings," he said. "She's under administrative review. The override logs you provided match internal timestamps. Cobb resigned from the board this morning, and the city's legal department has formally requested she recuse herself from enforcement authority pending final investigation." He paused. "Her access credentials have been revoked." I nodded, steady. "Thank you." Ortiz squinted slightly. "You built that system yourself, didn't you?" "Every line of code." He gave me the faintest grin. "Wish more residents understood how to fight back without breaking laws to do it." Then he left. I stood there for a moment in the middle of my driveway, watching his taillights fade, the sealed envelope cooling in my hand. Inside were the first written words that confirmed it all: breach of protocol, improper access, referred to city oversight. It wasn't over. The recall still loomed. The votes still had to be counted. But the engine of control that Colleen had quietly built behind HOA jargon and neighborhood charm had been pulled into the light. And this time, it wasn't going back underground. The community hall felt different this time. No pretense, no stage flowers on the sign-in table, no warm welcome from Colleen's assistant. Just rows of metal chairs filling up with neighbors who looked tired, tired of silence, tired of pretending their homes hadn't been turned into battlegrounds over lawn stripes, mailbox screws, and hidden override pings. This wasn't a regular HOA meeting. This was the recall vote. I sat near the front again, this time with Janice beside me and Mark 2 rows back. Tessa stayed home. I didn't want her absorbing the tension in a room packed with people carrying months, even years, of built-up frustration. What mattered was that she knew why I was here, why we were all here. Colleen stood behind the lectern, back straight, lips pressed into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her posture hadn't cracked, but her eyes betrayed her. They moved too much, scanning the room for allies that weren't standing up. "The accusations," she began, "have been sensationalized. While I may have overstepped my role, it was always with safety in mind. Security has become a major concern, and I took action when the system failed to protect this community." Her voice was steady, but she wasn't talking to us. She was talking to the few people still undecided, the ones who feared what would happen without a strong hand at the wheel. But even they weren't nodding this time. She looked toward the board table. Mark didn't look back. I stood when she finished, walking toward the designated speaker's podium without needing to be called. The agenda had listed me as a respondent, so I responded. "I won't repeat the footage," I said, keeping my voice even. "You've all seen it. You've seen the override logs, the security pings, the time-stamped entries. But this isn't just about what happened to me." I scanned the room. "It's about what could have happened to any of you." A murmur passed through the rows. Janice watched silently, arms crossed, shoulders squared. "I know systems," I continued. "I know how to build them, how to break them. What Colleen did wasn't just a technical violation. It was a personal one. She crossed into people's homes without their knowledge. She used her access not to protect, but to control. And when she was caught, she tried to rewrite the rules in real time. Colleen didn't interrupt, but her hands were clenched behind the lectern now. Her silence wasn't grace, it was calculation. "I'm not asking for chaos," I said. "I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for leadership that serves, that understands boundaries, that doesn't treat compliance like a weapon." I stepped back. No applause, no cheers, just the quiet understanding of a room full of people who'd finally seen the system for what it was. The vote began. Paper ballots, one by one. Each resident who showed ID was handed a slip and pointed to one of 3 tables arranged in the back. I watched as neighbors I'd never spoken to cast their votes. Young couples, retirees, single moms with toddlers strapped to their backs. A community, weary but still standing. Colleen stayed seated at the front table, watching the process with the stillness of a ship captain going down with her vessel. When the final count was tallied, the board secretary, someone Colleen had handpicked 2 years ago, stood behind the mic and read the numbers without inflection. Total votes cast, 117. Votes in favor of removal, 89. Votes opposed, 28. A pause. Then, "Colleen Durrett is hereby removed as HOA president, effective immediately." Mark stood from his seat and walked to the front, shoulders squared, voice firm. As acting secretary, I motioned to install a temporary board for 30 days while we hold public nominations for full re-election. Someone seconded it. The vote passed without opposition. Colleen stood slowly. No speech, no defense. She walked down the center aisle with her head held high, and her legacy unraveling behind her like a snagged thread. Outside, the night was cooler than I remembered, crisper. Janice stepped beside me as the last of the crowd filtered into the parking lot. "We're not done, you know." "I know." But we finally turned the page. We stood there, quietly, as the porch lights flickered on down the street, one by one. The new board held its first open forum 3 weeks later. No lectern, no closed-door vote packets. Just folding chairs in a circle on the lawn, outside the community center, with neighbors passing around clipboards and thermoses of coffee. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a start. Mark sat beside the new interim president, Cheryl Rourke. She'd spent the last 2 years quietly collecting signatures against every absurd rule Colleen passed. Now, she was leading policy rewrites with a transparency clause that required all access-level decisions to be publicly logged and stored off-site. I didn't speak that night. I didn't need to. The logs had done their job. The override system had been dismantled. The router in the HOA office was replaced with a standard lockdown connection that had no outbound privileges. The badge system had been purged too. Every board member now had to log every door swipe into a public ledger. The surveillance directive was dead. Daniel Cobb resigned formally 2 days after the vote. No apology. Just a single-page letter left on Cheryl's doorstep, with his gate clicker taped to the corner. As for Colleen, she moved out. Sold her house quietly, off-market, to a property manager from another town. No farewell emails, no statements. Just a rust-colored moving truck and a silence that felt deeper than her speeches ever did. Tessa and I watched the truck pull away from the upstairs window. She didn't say anything until the taillights disappeared behind the hill. "Is it over?" she asked. "Mostly," I said. "But the part that matters is." She nodded, then turned back to her desk where she'd been sketching the layout for her robotics team's next build. Her shoulders weren't tense anymore. She'd started sleeping with the door open again. A few days later, I walked around the house. No clipboard, no checklist. Just watching the sun stretch across the fence line and flicker through the branches of the old birch tree near the back corner. I passed the bathroom window and paused. The frame was still reinforced. The hinge still showed the small scuff where Colleen's shoe had caught. I'd left it there on purpose. Some marks aren't damage. Some are memory. I'd replaced the motion sensor not because it failed, but because it worked so well it had to be upgraded. The new one had 3 fail-safes, a shadow delay filter, and a cold detection threshold. Not even a leaf could sneak through unnoticed. But it wasn't about the tech anymore. It was about the promise I'd made. My sister hadn't needed to ask much. She only wanted to know one thing before she passed, that Tessa would be protected, that someone would stay, someone who wouldn't bow to pressure, or systems, or the slow erosion of control disguised as policy. Now, when Tessa came home from school, she didn't scan the yard before stepping out of the car. Now, when neighbors passed, they waved. Some stopped to talk. Mark invited me to sit on the new policy review committee. I declined. My work wasn't in meetings or forms. My work was in circuits and code, and a home wired not for paranoia, but for safety, with dignity. Janice still came by. We'd become a kind of quiet team. She'd run background checks on a few new board applicants without even being asked. Her cybersecurity firm offered to audit the HOA's new system, free of charge. People remembered, people noticed, and they acted. That was the legacy Colleen accidentally left behind. Not fear, but awareness. And a neighborhood that would never again hand over its boundaries without asking who held the key. The bathroom window stayed locked now, but not from fear, from memory, and from the understanding that the strongest homes aren't built just with walls, but with people, willing to say no when silence would have been easier. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.